The court said, and the government may call its next witness.
Mr. Finkel said, the government calls James Collins.
The law clerk said, please raise your right hand.
Witness sworn.
The court said, please state your name and spell it, and draw the microphone close to you.
The witness said, James Robert Collins, Jr.
The court said, speak up.
The witness said, James Robert Collins, Jr. James Robert Collins, and I use the apostrophe Jr.
The court said, so if you'll just speak into the mic and hold it very close, you may inquire.
Mr. Finkel said, thank you, Your Honor.
James Robert Collins, Jr., called as a witness by the government, having been duly sworn, testified as follows. Direct examination. By Mr. Finkel.
Mr. Collins, feel free to move the mic to suit you so you're comfortable. And if you could direct the mic directly toward your mouth so everybody can hear you.
How's this?
That's better. Thank you. Mr. Collins, are you known by any nicknames?
My parents called me Bo when I was born, and I've gone by that nickname since then.
Okay. And could you just point the mic directly at your mouth? Just turn it a little bit. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Collins, where do you work?
Mercantile Global Holdings.
What is Mercantile Global Holdings?
It is a holding company that wholly owns Mercantile Bank International.
What is Mercantile Bank International?
Mercantile Bank International is an international financial entity which is deemed a bank by FinCEN and operates under a license issued in Puerto Rico.
What is your position at Mercantile Bank?
I'm the chairman and CEO.
And CEO means what?
The most senior executive officer.
And how many years have you been with Mercantile Bank?
Approximately 5.
What's the current status of Mercantile Bank?
Mercantile Bank is unfortunately winding down its operations.
And when did that begin?
Yesterday.
Prior to that, Mr. Collins, approximately how many employees reported to you as the CEO?
Altogether, the total number of employees in the company were about 25.
And Mr. Collins, as part of your role as CEO, did you learn information about the revenues of Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
Did you have influence on how to market Mercantile Bank in the marketplace?
Yes.
And did you have communications with the bank's customers as the CEO?
Yes.
Who had the final decision-making authority for Mercantile Bank?
I did.
That's because you're the CEO?
That is because I am the senior executive officer.
What's an IFE?
An IFE is a license granted by the sovereign of Puerto Rico. It stands for International Financial Entity, and it is a unique bank charter.
And how is that different from a bank that is not an IFE, but located in the continental U.S.?
Generally speaking, when you apply for an IFE charter, you designate which capabilities you want to use, and only those capabilities are approved. In a normal bank charter, you have the ability to do all the things that a bank could do under that charter whether you want to or not.
Mr. Collins, during your time as CEO of Mercantile Bank, did the bank focus on a particular client base?
Yes. When we first began operations, we began with the vision that we would be a settlement bank to the digital asset industry. We were the first bank in the United States licensed to hold and transmit digital assets. And we had a fairly narrow focus.
Did there come a time, if ever, where an entity known as G Clubs became a client of Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
What about an entity known as G Fashion? Did that become a client of Mercantile Bank at one time?
Yes.
And what about the Himalaya Exchange? Was the Himalaya Exchange, that entity, ever a client of Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
Are any of those entities clients of Mercantile Bank today?
No.
Okay. Mr. Collins, I want to first talk about G Clubs. When did you first learn? Approximately when did you first learn about G Clubs?
It would have been the spring of 21.
And how did you become aware of G Clubs?
We were processing transactions for another IFE, and G Clubs was a client of that IFE. And there was a time where they processed or submitted a large volume of transactions through the other IFE for us to process.
What was that time period, approximately?
Also the spring of 21.
And what was the name of that other IFE?
Mercantile Bank.
And can you explain to the jury, please, Mr. Collins, why Mercantile Bank was helping process transactions for Medici?
It's not uncommon for banks to process transactions for each other. We had a good technology stack. We owned our own technology stack. We were in a position to do so for Medici. That's typically referred to as a corresponding bank relationship.
And so what is that term, a corresponding bank?
Corresponding bank means that one bank will bank the other bank and vice versa.
Now what issues, if any, was Medici having with its relationship with G Club at that time in the spring of 2021?
I'm not sure I understand the question in terms of what issues they have.
What were the nature of the transactions that Mercantile was processing for Medici in around that time? Spring of 2021?
So there was a high volume of transactions that came through all at once, which was unexpected. They were mostly domestic wires. And they are, to give you an example. Their typical volume in a day might have been 4 or 5 transactions. And these turned into 200 or so transactions a day, which is a lot for us to process, without advance notice.
And what was the approximate dollar volume at that time?
I don't remember daily dollar volumes. But the total aggregate dollar volumes from that first period of time was about $30 million.
Subsequent to those transaction volume issues, did you meet with anyone from G Clubs?
Yes.
Who did you meet with?
We met with Ana Izquierdo and Limori Reyes.
Mr. Finkel said, could you please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 124? While that's coming up, Mr. Collins, well withdrawn. Do you see the image on your screen, sir?
No.
Who is depicted in Government Exhibit 124?
That's Limori Reyes.
Mr. Finkel said, the government offers Government Exhibit 124.
Mr. Comraju said, no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit 124 received in evidence.
Where did this meeting with Ms. Reyes and Ms. Izquierdo take place?
My home in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
And what was your understanding of Ms. Reyes's title with G Clubs?
She presented herself as president.
And what was Ms. Izquierdo's role at G Clubs, based on your understanding?
She presented herself as the general counsel.
And who did most of the talking for G Clubs during that meeting with you in your home?
Ana Izquierdo.
How did Ms. Izquierdo describe G Clubs to you?
She described it as a club of like-minded individuals. Kind of an affinity club that could have access to exclusive merchandise, generally in that nature.
Did Ms. Izquierdo or Ms. Reyes, in that meeting with you in your home, describe to you anything about trying to take down the Chinese Communist Party?
We didn't talk about the Chinese Communist Party.
Did Ms. Izquierdo describe what G Club's target market was?
We discussed that there was a Chinese diaspora of like-minded people that were interested in these types of offerings.
Did Ms. Izquierdo or Ms. Reyes say whether G Clubs offered its members stock?
I don't recall us speaking about that.
Mr. Finkel said, we can take that down, Ms. Loftus. Have you ever spoken with any G Clubs members?
I don't believe I have.
After that meeting with Ms. Izquierdo and Ms. Reyes, did Mercantile take G Clubs on as a client?
Yes.
And before G Clubs was taken on as a client, what, if any, review did G Clubs go through by Mercantile Bank?
Mercantile Bank has an extensive Bank Secrecy Act compliance process that is led by our compliance department. And we went through the normal process of that.
And could you just describe, at a high level for the members of the jury, what that process entails?
As a rule of thumb, you want to identify the controlling parties and the parties that are benefiting from the activity of the bank above a certain percentage level. Those are referred to as UBOs, is the acronym we use, Ultimate Beneficial Owner. You want to identify source of funds. You want to identify the use of funds and have some general understanding of their business purpose and expectations.
I'm just going to ask you, Mr. Collins, you can move the top part of the microphone, just the top part. It's like an accordion, and point it at your mouth so that it can pick up the sound. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Who is represented by G Clubs as their ultimate beneficial owner.
I don't actually recall.
Did G Clubs pass the due diligence process of Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
During the due diligence process, did Mercantile Bank have any concerns about G Clubs?
Yes.
And what was that concern?
There was clearly a relationship with a gentleman named Miles Gway. We had concerns about Miles Gway, given his risk profile and his history with the Chinese government.
Have you ever met Miles Gway?
I don't believe so.
Did Mercantile seek representation from G Clubs about its relationship with Miles Gway?
I'm sorry. Can you say the question again?
Sure. Did Mercantile request information from G Clubs about whether and to what extent G Clubs had a relationship with Miles Gway?
Yes.
And what was G Club's response, at a high level, to those inquiries?
G Clubs ensured us that Miles Gway would not qualify as a UBO. That none of the money in G Clubs was his own. That he only had a relationship that would be described as an influencer or marketing relationship. That they paid him for.
And who made those representations to the Mercantile Bank? Do you know?
Well, corporately, G Clubs did, but they were also made verbally by Anna and Limori.
And if Mercantile Bank had known at the time that Miles Gway had operating control over G Clubs funds, would Mercantile have opened an account for G Clubs?
No.
After G Clubs became a client of Mercantile, at a high level, what was their banking activity like?
At a high level, their banking activity was what I would call transactional. But we didn't. They had started planning for another membership drive, but I don't believe they ever conducted that. And so we were processing a handful of transactions a day.
What do you mean by membership drive?
The initial flurry of transactions that we processed while they were at Medici Bank were affiliated or associated with a membership drive where they were selling memberships in G Clubs.
And who told you that it was associated with a membership drive?
I can't recall precisely who told that, but it came up in our compliance process.
Mr. Finkel said, if we could please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 106. As that's coming up, Mr. Collins, as your relationship between Mercantile and G Clubs unfolded. Who did you primarily interact with at G Clubs?
A gentleman I'll call Alex H. because I can't pronounce his last name. It's difficult.
Okay. Did you interact with Ana Izquierdo?
A little bit.
What about Limari Reyes?
Not as much.
Who is depicted in Government Exhibit 106?
That's Alex H.
Mr. Finkel said, Government offers 106.
Mr. Camacho said, no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit 106 received in evidence.
What does the H stand for?
His last name.
Can you pronounce it to the best of your ability?
I really can't. Even when I was looking at it to read it. It was difficult to phonetically pronounce.
Okay. What was your understanding of Alex H's role at G Clubs?
Alex was, I believe, operating in what you would describe as the capacity of a CFO. He never represented his title.
And CFO means what?
Chief Financial Officer.
Do you know what entity paid Alex H's salary?
I can't say that I had knowledge of that.
Mr. Finkel said, you can take that down, Ms. Loftus. What is Yieldesta?
Yieldesta was an investment vehicle that we launched that was based on algorithmic trading.
And by we, who's the we in that sentence?
Mercantile Bank International.
What sort of investing did Yieldesta do?
It was predominantly futures trading.
Did there come a time, if ever, when G Clubs invested in Yieldesta?
Yes.
How much, approximately, did G Clubs invest in Yieldesta?
$3 million.
You were speaking before about interacting with Alex H. Ana Izquierdo. Did there come a time, if ever, that you communicated regarding G Clubs with Yvette Wong?
I don't have a recollection of it, but there were a number of calls that she may have been on.
Did Alex H. withdrawn? What about an individual named Howrenhe?
Also someone that may have been on a call, but I don't have a memory of specific conversations.
What were the types of communications you had with Alex H.?
Generally we talked about the potential for a membership drive again. We talked about the strategy of Yieldesta. It was pretty limited to just that.
When you pitched Yieldesta to Alex H., what, if anything, was his reaction?
He was interested in investing.
Was it your understanding that Alex H. had the ability to make that decision?
Not exclusively.
What did Alex H. say, if anything, about who needed to make that decision?
He referenced a group that he called the management. Needed to come to a decision on it and that he would represent.
Who? Did Alex H. indicate who the management was?
No.
You mentioned before that G Fashion became a customer or client of Mercantile. Is that right?
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Sure. Did there come a time, if ever, when an entity known as G Fashion became a client of Mercantile?
Yes.
Did G Fashion also go through a due diligence review?
Yes.
And did it pass the due diligence review?
Yes.
Did Mercantile have any concerns about G Fashion's association, if any, with an individual named Miles Gua?
Yes.
And what representations, if any, did G Fashion make about its association with Miles Gua?
They also represented that Miles was not a UBO, that he had no money in the business. He'd received no financial benefit of the business except for being paid as a spokesperson.
And was Mercantile satisfied with those representations?
Yes.
And had Mercantile known that Miles Gua in fact had operational control over G Fashion? Would Mercantile have opened G Fashion as a client?
No.
You mentioned before that you didn't recall the UBO of G Clubs as it was reported to Mercantile Bank. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. Can you ask the question again?
I think you mentioned a moment ago that you didn't recall the name of the UBO, the ultimate beneficial owner of G Clubs as it was reported to Mercantile Bank. Is that right?
Correct.
Mr. Finkel said, all right. Ms. Loftus, if we can show the witness what's been marked for identification as GXMR 1209. Go to the next page. Sorry. It's MER 1210. Apologies. If we can go to the next page, please. Next page. Next page. Keep going. Yeah. Up, please. Can you zoom in on the bottom?
By Mr. Finkel.
Mr. Collins, could you please take a look at the image on your screen, sir? Could you please take a look at the image on your screen and let me know if that refreshes your recollection as to the name of the UBO that G Clubs reported to Mercantile Bank?
It really doesn't. I don't recall having seen this document.
Mr. Finkel said, okay. We can take that down. When, if ever, did you first learn about a company called the Himalaya Exchange?
I learned about the Himalaya Exchange when Alex H. suggested that he would introduce me to another company he was familiar with that was a crypto exchange. Digital asset exchange, who might be a large depositor who might be interested in opening up a bank account with us.
When, approximately, was this?
Late summer, early fall of 2021.
Did the Himalaya Exchange ultimately become a client of Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
And did it go through a due diligence review?
Yes.
Did it pass the due diligence review?
Yes.
And did Mercantile Bank have any concerns about Himalaya Exchange's association, if any, with an individual known by the name of Miles Gov't?
Yes.
And what did the Himalaya Exchange tell Mercantile Bank about its association with Miles Gov't?
They told us that he was not a UBO. That none of the money that they'd be depositing with us was owned or affiliated with Miles Gov't. And that they had no association with him whatsoever other than as a paid spokesperson.
Mr. Collins, what was your understanding at the time of who was in charge of the Himalaya Exchange?
My understanding at the time is that William J.E. was in charge of the Himalaya Exchange.
Mr. Finkel said, if we can please display what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 103. Who is this individual?
That's William J.E.
Do you know him by any other names?
I believe his Chinese name is Kinming J.E.
Mr. Finkel said, we can take that down. Could you please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 113? Do you recognize this individual?
That is a gentleman that lived in the BVI who had an executive title with the Himalaya Exchange. And I don't recall his name.
Mr. Finkel said, okay. Government offers GX 113.
Mr. Kamaraju said, objection since he doesn't know the man's name.
The court said, sustained.
What is your understanding of this individual's association with the Himalaya Exchange?
He was designated as I believe president of the Himalaya Exchange in the BVI, which was I believe a requirement of BVI to have a local senior executive that represented the company.
And what did William J.E. tell you, if anything, about this individual, Government Exhibit 113?
Just what I said.
Did you ever interact with this individual about Himalaya Exchange management?
He was on one or two of the conference calls we had initially. But it became clear that he wasn't really making any decisions about the business.
Mr. Finkel said, if we can please display what's in evidence as Government Exhibit BR208A. You can scroll down to the next page. Please. Can you zoom in on that signature line, please, Ms. Loftus? Can you read that name, please, Mr. Collins?
Jesse Brown.
Does that refresh your recollection about?
Yes.
Mr. Finkel said, okay. If we can zoom out of that, please, Ms. Loftus. Did Jesse Brown purport to sign this document that's on your screen?
I never discussed this document with Jesse Brown.
Have you seen this document before?
I don't believe so.
Who signed this document, based on your review of it right now?
It appears that Jesse Brown signed the document.
Mr. Finkel said, okay. Could we please display for the witness only GX 113?
The court said, it's now 3 o'clock, so we'll stop here. Members of the jury, we're going to return on Monday with our new schedule. 9:30 to 11:30 with a half an hour break, and then 12 to 2:30 with another half-hour break, returning at 3 and then going until 5. On Wednesday there will be no court. Remember that you're not allowed to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Don't permit anyone to discuss it in your presence, and don't read, watch, or listen to anything from any source having to do with anything concerning this matter. Have a good weekend.
Jury not present.
The court said you may step out. Don't discuss your testimony.
Witness not present.
The court said you may be seated. Is there anything before we break for the weekend?
Mr. Kamaraju said, nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, nor the government. Have a nice weekend, Your Honor.
The court said, have a good weekend.
Mr. Kamaraju said, thank you, Your Honor.
Adjourned to June 17, 2024, at 9 a.m.